care as much about inequality as they care about inequalities of hypothetical trajectory. So meaning that it isn't so bad if you're rich and I'm poor, if I believe that if I put my best foot forward, I might also, my life will improve across time, or even if mine doesn't, my children's life will. Because I think people are more interested. I think people vote their dreams rather than their realities, and the dream has to be intact. And I do have a couple of...
Just one thing. I think that's true, but it's also true that people resent wealth when they think it's unearned. Yes. And I think the more we move towards a centrally planned economy, the more we have cronyism, the more there are real problems in the kind of the mixed economy that we have, where we don't have pure capitalism, then the more they're suspicious of the people at the top. Because indeed, they see the people at the top schmoozing with the politicians. And that's what scares them. So I think America has shifted, partially because they're not sure that people have earned it, and partially because they've been bombarded with this message. You should envy them. It's immoral inequality. So I think it's a combination, the combination of the dream, the justice of it. Is it just for somebody to have that wealth because they've earned it, and this issue of there's been a shift in the morality, in the moral perception.
I think we have a structural problem that's going to emerge too. And this is where I would take some issue, I suppose, with the idea that there's nothing intrinsically bad about inequality. I mean, because it presumes something approximating a level playing field, and I'm not thinking so much about systemic barriers. Well, let me just make the argument very briefly and tell me what you think, because one of the things that I spent a lot of time looking at what predicts success in functional Western hierarchies, and the two intrinsic psychological factors that predict success are intelligence, as you assess it with IQ tests, which is the best way to assess intelligence by an overwhelming margin, and trait conscientiousness, which is industriousness and orderliness, sometimes known as grit. And those are quite good predictors of long-term success. They account for about 40% of the variability across time, which leaves a lot of other factors still at play. But there's something quite terrifying about the intelligence end of that equation, because IQ is normally distributed in the population, and there's incredible differences between people who are at the top of the IQ distribution and people who are at the bottom. Like, you can't believe how variable people are in their intelligence. It's quite staggering. Well, I can give you an example. So it's actually illegal in the United States to induct someone into the armed forces if they have an IQ of less than 83. And the reason for that is that the armed forces determined after 100 and some years of extraordinarily rigorous testing, motivated by the hope that everyone would be fodder for the armed forces, because that's their hope, right? Because they have a chronic manpower shortage, peacetime and wartime. So they want people in the armed forces. They're not going to exclude them unless they have to. And the consequence of the analysis was that if you have an IQ of 83 or less, there isn't anything you can be trained to do in the armed forces that isn't positively counterproductive. It's like, yes, and this is a way bigger fact than you think, because that's about 10% of the population. And so we have a problem, and I would say it's a problem that is going to manifest itself in something that approximates an inequality that looks unfair, because the cognitively dispossessed are going to have a very rough time competing. They already do. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about that. And so see, the problem with producing hierarchies and even allowing people to climb up the hierarchies responsibly is that the hierarchies still produce dispossession at the bottom. And we need to figure out how to deal with that, even if the only consequence of that dispossession is the generation of envy, because envy can bring down the state. Oh, yeah. And you might tell people, well, you have a moral responsibility not to be envious, and fair enough, perhaps you do, but it isn't clear that that's going to be sufficient solution to solve the problem. And we also have the cognitive problem that no one will talk about, and that we should talk about, because it's real.
Well, so it sounds like we're talking about the same thing, whether we're talking about it from a cognitive perspective or a financial perspective, that in terms of inequality, it's not really all the people sort of at the bottom, but it's the bottom of the bottom that can't help themselves. That seems like maybe, what do you do about that?
Well, one point that Rand made about this, and I think making this point is part of the solution to people being envious, letting people internalize this point, is that other people's goodness, other people's accomplishments, other people's intelligence, other people's wealth if they've earned it, and a society that enables the most productive, smartest people to achieve what they can achieve is good for everyone, and especially good for the people at the bottom of whatever hierarchy we might be talking about, of whatever level of ability, whatever level of money. And we can see that in giving a little bit more freedom, a little bit more capitalism in countries like China and India has helped, well, everyone there, but disproportionately the poorest people who were starving to death, who had incredible infant mortality rates, and you were talking about this before, and we've seen them go down. So I think envy, part of the cause of envy is wrong moral views that people have, moral views that hold that the purpose of someone's life isn't to achieve things in their own life, isn't to reach their own happiness, isn't to form a company like Microsoft and get a computer on every desk in the world running Microsoft software. If someone does that, we think he's selfish, we think it's bad, or at least it's neutral, and we envy him and resent him if we're brought up to think that way. Whereas if we're brought up to appreciate the people who created this tremendous prosperity that both of you were talking about, and to see that as morally good and as right and as benefiting all of us, but benefiting us not because they did it for us, but because taking responsibility for your life, having goals, having something you want out of life, leading a life of your own on a grand scale, for your own sake, is what benefits not only you, but makes you a value to everybody else. If we had a society that understood that, I think that combats the envy. And one of the things that Rand wrote, she had a really interesting article called The Age of Envy that talked about, and also another article called The Untitled Letter, which was a comment on Rawls. And she was very concerned about this kind of egalitarianism and this kind of growing nihilism and envy in the culture. She thought of it as un-American. This isn't the kind of thing, this was more characteristic of Europe in the 40s, and this wasn't an American way of thinking, but it was catching on here. And I think she was prophetic in that. I think we're seeing a lot of that today.
So let's shift a little bit, because I know we can talk about inequality and the individual and all that. We can do that all night long. But the title of this talk is Philosophy and the Human Soul. So we only talked for literally about 20 seconds, the four of us, before, we didn't plan anything about what we were going to do here. So I thought the best way to start that would be, how would you even define the soul? Yaron, I'll start with you.
Really?
Yeah.
You got a psychologist, a philosopher, and a finance guy, and you're
But this is just for Joe Rogan in my job, man. We are.
And the rumor is that finance guys have no soul.
Exactly. I mean,
I was actually going to start with Jordan, but you looked down for a second, which was the cue that I should go right to you. Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a succinct, clear definition of it, but it has to do with consciousness and values. It has to do with our conscious experiences, the sum of our conscious experiences, our being, and the values that we have as individuals, the things that are most important to us. And that, I think, experience is what I would refer as our soul or our spirit. I think these are somewhat interchangeable. When I talk about spiritual experiences, it's an experience of consciousness. It's if you listen to a piece of music and the combination of emotion, values, and your conscious listening and absorbing, that to me is what spirit, soul would mean.
Greg?
Yeah, I would say, speaking as a philosopher and first as a Rand scholar here, she had the phrase that man is a being of self-made soul. So the idea here is your soul is your consciousness, as the faculty, your ability to know and to think, but also you have to build who you are, build your character, build your personality, build your values, come to value things, set your life around them. By doing that over time and pursuing them, you develop a character, you develop into a certain type of person, you develop into a distinct individual. And there's a beautiful line in the Fountainhead, which this is the theme of this conference. Someone talks about how most people long for immortality, but when you meet them the next time, they weren't the same as they were the last. They're mutable, they're constantly changing, what they're after is constantly changing. But the hero of the novel, his friend says, you could imagine him existing forever. He's achieved immortality in his day-to-day life, because there's a constancy to them. And that kind of constancy, that having a soul, having an I, being a particular person, it's an achievement. It's the achievement of having formed values, having formed something you want out of your life, and then having built for yourself through living this way a character that's adapted to that, a character that's focused on that.
You know, this reminds me of Groundhog Day in a way, because in the Q&As that we've been doing for the last couple months, a couple times it's come up, what's your favorite comedy? And you've mentioned Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray has to consistently come back and do it better and do it better and do it better and do it better. Now I've set you up. What is your definition of the soul?
Well, I was thinking that the words, the hand that writes and then moves on, came into my mind. And then I was thinking, well, this is the way I conceptualize how consciousness works. And so maybe this is, in some sense, the locale of the soul. So I don't believe that we're driven deterministically, like obviously we are to some degree, but I don't think that that's the right way of conceptualizing how human consciousness works. I think it's putting the cart before the horse in some sense. So the way it looks to me is that what we have arrayed in front of us is a landscape of possibility. And I think that that's phenomenologically accurate. You know, when you wake up in the morning, especially when you wake up at 3 in the morning and you're concerned about how your life is going, you see an array of possible futures manifest themselves in front of you. And, you know, there are more possible futures, of course, than you can imagine, but there's plenty that make themselves manifest. I could do this. I could do that. This could happen. What about this? Maybe I should do this. And it's like there's a branching landscape in front of you, and some of the places that you're headed to are more likely than others, and some of them take a lot more effort to attain than others, but it's a distribution of possible landscapes. And that's actually your reality. It's not like you're driven deterministically by the present. You see a branching landscape of possibility in front of you, and I think of that as potential. And we all know about potential because we upbraid ourselves and each other for not living up to our potential, which is a very interesting thing that we do, because potential isn't something concrete. And in fact, it's the opposite of concrete, and yet we act as if it's the most real thing. You should live up to your potential, you know, and your conscience will bother you if you don't live up to your potential. So you have a potential, and there's a potential that manifests itself. And then what you seem to do is that you make choices between those alternate realities, and you do that in part by imposing a value structure on them and deriving a pathway as a consequence of that. But you decide which of those potentials are going to manifest themselves in actuality. And so you are the hand that writes that and then moves on. And this is a very deep idea. I mean, I've traced it back to I think, our most profound religious intuitions. The idea that it was the Word of God, for example, that gave rise to habitable order out of chaos at the beginning of time, I think is a reflection of the same idea. I think the soul is the thing that mediates between potential and actuality. And I mean that literally and metaphorically at the same time. That's what you're doing, is you're confronting potential, which is that which could be, and you're deciding which of that is going to be. And the thing that's doing that is the soul. And that's its divine task. And I think the fact that you do that is actually why it's necessary for societies to grant you the idea of intrinsic right. That's why it's necessary for functional societies to be predicated on the idea that you have intrinsic value, is because you actually are the locale where potential transforms itself into actuality. And so we determine the action of our soul determines the actuality of the world. I think that's genuinely the case.
So this is really interesting to me, because I'm watching you guys and I can see a lot of agreement, but obviously Jordan made at least 2 references to God and religion there. Now, obviously this is where an objectivist and Jordan would have a point of disagreement. This is why you're doing these public events with Sam Harris. And one of the things that I've been thinking about it as we've been on tour is, at the end of the day, if we all ultimately agree, and if everyone in this room, if we could ultimately agree on a morality and the definition of a soul that all made sense, and Jordan's perhaps had a more religious connotation and yours didn't, and we all could live functioning good lives within that, then does it really matter beyond the interest in the intellectual discussion? Because there was a lot of agreement. I could see it in your body language in both of you guys. Greg, I'll start with you.
Well, let me start with some of the things I agree with a lot, and including some of the use of religious language. I think there's a good reason for, even for those of us who aren't religious or don't think of ourselves as, and I think of myself as an atheist. I am an atheist. But, though I know you interpret that word differently. But
he'll tell you if you're an atheist or not.
We'll get into an argument about this later. But, so first of all, I think what we see in what you're describing about the many manifold potentials and the soul actualizes it is a conviction which I very much agree with, and I think we can know is true, and I think I agree we presuppose in all of our thinking and all of our judging of people, which is that we have free will, that there's not a future that's written and we're just on a path traveling down it, but rather in every moment we're able to make choices, and our choices change the future. And that is a really profound fact. It's a profound fact about our consciousness. It's connected to everything else that's of value about us. And I agree, if that wasn't true of us, we'd be a very different kind of creature. We wouldn't interact with each other in the same way, and we wouldn't need the same kind of political structure. And it's such a profound fact about us that we don't really have language for it, or very good language for it. Religion has been the form in which people have thought about the most profound facts, about their most profound experiences, about their understandings of them from as long as there's been people, or as long as there's been, anyway, for a very, very long time. And as we've lost religion, we haven't found ways, or haven't always found ways, to conceptualize independently of religion those kind of profound values, the profound role of freedom in human life, what our highest potential is. And so if you're going to talk about those things, it's very hard to do it without really reaching for at least religious metaphor.
See, that's a really crucial issue, I think. I think it's a fundamentally crucial issue.
But I want to say, though, because just to finish the disagreeing part, what's true matters, right? And something can be a beautiful metaphor, but if understood literally is false. And one of the things I think we need to do to lead our lives well, to achieve these kinds of values, is to really value our minds and value our reason and value getting at the truth. So if it turns out that something's false, then believing that it's true is not going to make our lives better. And so I don't think it could turn out that we're going to have a very deep disagreement about what's true about the basic facts of reality, and yet we're all going to be hunky-dory on everything else. I think those disagreements will make a difference. But we have to acknowledge the role of consciousness and freedom in life, and I think there is an agreement between us on that. Anyway,
what I've observed is, for example, in my clinical practice, when I'm talking about life and death moral issues, and these are in situations where extreme things are happening in families and in individuals' lives, talking about events that might have produced post-traumatic stress disorder or that set people up for murder at times, or suicide, or terrible suffering, some of which is induced voluntarily. The probability that I can have a discussion with my clients about that at a level that will be salutary without using religious/metaphorical language is zero. If the discussion can't take place in the domain of good versus evil, something like that, and this is especially true, I would say, for post-traumatic stress disorder, you just don't get anywhere with it. And I've been thinking about the narrative issue a lot, constantly, and I think that, we need to use, this is one of the weaknesses of the rationalist argument, I think, is that we have to use heuristics to operate in the world. So heuristics are simplifying maneuvers. And there's no option. You have to use heuristics. And the reason for that is because there is a lot more world than there is of you. And so you take this incredibly complex reality and you simplify it. And now the simplifications have to have merit, and what makes them have merit is a topic for a very lengthy discussion. But to produce those simplifications, you have to use heuristics. You have to use cognitive shortcuts. And it looks to me like narrative is a heuristic, and that the reason that we need to tell stories, and that we probably need to have our ethic grounded in stories, is because you can't make a list of rules that will tell you how to live. Rules don't suffice, but you can tell stories that lay out broad principles, and those are heuristic principles. Now, but the thing is that the most fundamental stories seem to have a religious core. Now, I'm not exactly sure why that is, although I think it probably has to do with something I referred to earlier, which is the idea that, you know, you are, as a soul, you're the thing that transforms potential into actuality. That seems to be the grounding concept in some sense. So that's the grounding concept. There's something divine about that. Out of that arises a sequence of stories that are shaped across perhaps evolutionary history, and inside that our more articulated ethic exists. And I don't see a way out of that, because you cannot make an exhaustive list of rules that enable ethical movement forward, and you need to do that if you had a purely rational view of the way that human cognition functions. It's something like that.
So let's pause right there. Can either one of you figure out a way out of that? I mean, that would be the answer that an objectivist would want to have, right? Here we are. We got a whole bunch of them right in front of you.
So I don't think you could have a list of rules if the rule, you're meaning something like an algorithm that you live your life by.
Exactly,
and
an algorithm.
I think that's just not something we can do. That's not the way the human mind works, and the world is complicated, and you're not going to get a bunch of if-then statements that take you to. I mean, you can't even do that for a lot of physical systems to explain them.
Right.
But I think we can understand them rationally. Now, this might be similar to what we were talking about in the green room about Sam's view of reason and yours and mine. We might got to figure out where they all lie. But I don't think reason is just about coming up with algorithms. I think we come up with concepts. Concepts enable us to assimilate vast quantities of similar things to one another and learn from about future instances from past ones. We can get quite subtle principles, but I think moral principles are not things that take the form of simple rules. Don't lie. They're, to take Rand's version of the virtue of honesty, which isn't don't lie, it's your recognition of the fact that what's unreal is unreal and it can't be of value. So faking things won't work. It won't make them real. Somehow the thing you fake is going to come back to haunt you. That's not a simple rule of what to do in each situation. It's a kind of broad fact that you can use to steer your life by. And in order to use it to steer your life by and to fully understand it, you need to think about how it plays out in a lot of different contexts, right? You need to think about what it really means in practice. And art, stories, but literature, but also other forms of art, I think, are an indispensable means to doing this, both with ethical truths like this and also with other metaphysical truths, views about what kind of world we're in.
So I guess part of the discussion, and as it progresses, I don't necessarily mean this discussion in particular, but obviously I'm not an enemy of reason by any stretch of the imagination, but I do see that it's hard for people who promote reason as the fundamental mechanism to distinguish between reason and the generation of algorithms. And you can say, well, my concept of reason extends beyond the generation of algorithms, and fine, but then my question would be, well, exactly what are the mechanisms by which reason functions when what it's doing isn't generating algorithms? Because algorithms aren't enough, and we know that, right? Which is why we don't have expert diagnostic systems, for example. So then the reason starts to look something like metaphor, it starts to look something like narrative, and then I start thinking, yeah, but that's not exactly the Enlightenment concept of reason. So we're starting to move into a different domain. And
well,
so
I think there's more than just algorithms and metaphor and narrative. I think, first of all, one thing reason can do is come up with metaphors and narratives. But there's more than just those three things. I also think there's the formation of abstract principles. I don't think what Newton did in writing the Principia was coming up with algorithms. There are algorithms in it, or things you can algorithmatize about how to prove certain things. But the act of forming the concept inertia, that's not exactly, that's something else. And I think it's
inertia might be an algorithm.
Yeah,
but the act of coming up with it
exactly.
is something. Yes.
And I think there's a whole and underexplored area of philosophy and maybe cognitive psychology, thinking about what are these acts of reason? How does reason function? How is it that we can go from the kind of information we have in perception to a more and more sophisticated understanding of the world? And I've written some on this. Other people have. I don't know how much I should try to explain here, but I can plug. I have a chapter called Conceptualization and Justification in a book called Concepts and Their Role in Knowledge that gives my sense of what reason does here.
See, because the other thing that's come up among the cognitive scientists in particular, And also the robotics types is as people, and this is Rodney Brooks in particular, who invented the Roomba, by the way, but who's an absolute, well, it's a major accomplishment because the Roomba doesn't have a brain, but it operates intelligently. Like, it's a major accomplishment, that thing. And it took Brooks actually reconstructed how artificial intelligence robotics engineers were conceptualizing intelligence, and he thought of it as something much more embodied rather than conceptual. So it was the Roomba is actually the consequence of very, very high-level thinking about the relationship between reason and action in the world. Like, one of the things the more sophisticated cognitive psychologists have been wrestling with is the fact that a lot of what we thought of as abstract reason is actually something that's more dependent on embodiment than we'd had ever possibly conceived, right? And so the idea of disembodied reason, which is also, I would say, an Enlightenment concept, seems to be lacking. It's lacking in functionality. You have to be embodied. And the thing to me is that an embodied reason looks to me a lot more like the hero of a story than it looks like disembodied reason. I think that's a better metaphor. And so partly why I like the idea of the logos, for example, rather than the idea of reason is because, and this is partly reflected in its conceptual Christian origins, because the logos in Christianity is something that's actually embodied, right? It's the Word made flesh. There's a link between the rational logos, logic, and the thing that's embodied. And it's the interaction between those two that produces the phenomenon that you described as what drove Newton, for example, when he was producing his algorithms. That's not an algorithm. But it's something else, but it's certainly not disembodied reason.
But even that metaphor of the Word made flesh, right? It sounds as though something that could have been disembodied was disembodied once, and now it got embodied. And so it still sounds to me a little bit too much like this disembodied conception of, if you want to call it reason or mind, whereas I think we want a conception of what reason is and what it does that involves the fact from the start that it's a feature of certain living organisms. These organisms have perceptual systems. Those are bodily, if anything is. And it's a faculty of integrating the data that's coming in through those organs, helping us direct ourselves through the world, and then on a grander and grander scale. So I do think in the Enlightenment, what we're getting is a lot of reflection for the first time, or for one of the first times, a renewed reflection on reason, what it is, how it works. And there are several different views, right? Some more materialistic views, like into Holbach and so forth, and then these more the Cartesian-type views. And I think most of the views that came out of that are wrong. And I think it's sad because it's a period when people were really valuing the mind.
Well, they were productively wrong.
Well,
because they got us somewhere else. But it certainly does seem the case that, and this is, again, I think the problem with the idea of reason per se is that it's not a sufficiently differentiated idea to account for how it is that we actually operate in the world. And so, and the AI types and the psychologists are really trying to sort that out. But see, one of the things that happened to me when I was arguing with Sam Harris about this, because Sam believes that you can derive values from facts, and more or less in an unmediated way, although he has some differences of opinion with himself about how unmediated that is. It's like, it's very difficult to be entirely coherent when you think through something that's complicated. There's likely to be inconsistencies in your argument because it's so complicated. But it looks to me like it's actually formally impossible to derive values from facts in an unmediated sense. You need something to mediate between the facts and the values. And then I would also say it looks like it's impossible for you to derive that structure merely over the course of your life. You don't have enough time. You're not smart enough and you don't have enough time. And so you have an embodied biological platform, or you are that embodied biological platform, and it's actually the consequence of, let's say, at least in part, evolutionary pressures operating over about a 3.5 billion year period. And so it's possible that you can derive facts from values, but it takes you 3.5 billion years to do it properly. And what you have that allows you to do that in your life, to look at a set of facts and to decide how to proceed, is the intermediation, the unconscious intermediation of that unbelievably deep structure. And when I've said to Sam something that really annoys him, I said, well, you think you're an atheist, but you're actually not. What I'm actually saying is your conscious apprehension of yourself is a very thin layer that's laid on top of what you are, because you don't know who you are. And most of what you do is unconscious, and that's actually there isn't a serious cognitive psychologist in the world who doesn't think that most of what you do is unconscious, by the way. And I would say that unconscious has a structure, and that's a narrative structure, and that narrative structure is deep. And so that even if you describe yourself as atheistic, because in the explicit content of your thinking you see no room for the grounding of your conceptions in divinity, I would say, well, that isn't how your unconscious is structured at all. And now, and you might object, but then the objection you would have is, well, how is it structured?
Yeah.
How is it structured, since it's 99% of you?
I think I've got a guy over there with a slight objection. He almost jumped out of his chair. All right.
How is your unconscious structured?
Which, by the way, I think this is particularly interesting because I think you have a lot of agreements with Jordan on plenty of stuff, and I think you have a lot of agreements with Sam on plenty of stuff, but this is where this argument has gotten down to. It's a really, really rich place, I think.
Well, I mean, this is the big issue, right? So I have agreements with Sam on stuff but we have different reasons for having that agreement. And so, for example, I agree with him in his art, but his conception of his art is very different than our conception of his art. And he has no free will in that conception, so that blows my mind, how you can even talk about an is art and values without having free will. And he talks about choices without free will, which is challenging.
Well, we see that tied around
maybe we'll do that on the
and then we might
come
to some certain agreement about I don't know, rights or something. With Jordan, although I think even our conception of rights is going to be a little different, because I don't see how you can get to rights without understanding the role of reason and how reason functions and what the enemy of reason ultimately is, which is what I mentioned earlier, which is force. So I think, to go back to your original question way back, I think there's no way for us to have different foundations and not come up with different conclusions. We're going to have to come up with different conclusions. Now, we might agree on certain issues in politics, but for example, I think we're going to disagree quite profoundly on ethics, right? I think, just watching some of Jordan's things on sacrifice and so on the role of Jesus or our view of Jesus is going to be very, very profoundly different. And that affects human behavior. That affects individual human behavior. So they're going to be, you can't start with different premises and develop them and come up with exactly the same way and say, okay, we agree on this stuff. But no, these things have profound consequences. The disagreements have profound consequences. Now, when I think of my subconscious, I don't think of it as this, and again, I'm not a philosopher, not a psychologist, so this is the way a layman in these terms would think. I think of my subconscious not as a 99% darkness down there, right? I think of it as something that accumulated information, conclusions, values, decisions that I've made since childhood, since before I was completely conscious of them. I have access to some of them, hopefully cognitive psychology and psychology can help me get access to more of them. But they're accessible to me. They're not some mystery. They're accessible to me. And that when I am making a decision in life, I try to make it based on what I know, not based on what I don't know that's back there, right? So I try to accumulate facts. This is the finance guy in me, right, or the reality guy in me. I try to accumulate facts and integrate them and try to distinguish between which facts are legitimate and which facts are illegitimate, and try to integrate them and try to make a decision based on logic, based on reality. And, sometimes my emotion will say, and this is my subconscious maybe speaking, don't do that, or that's a bad thing. But so what, right? If reality and the facts are with me, then I'll ignore that subconscious. So I don't see us as we've got some choice over here, but we're really driven by the subconscious. The subconscious is there for me to explore, and I become a better person as I know my subconscious better. I understand where my emotions are coming from, and I understand that better. But at the end of the day, when I make a choice out there, it's based on reality and facts. And I see reality of facts. I don't see anything coming between me and this plastic bottle. Again, my simplistic view, right? Here's the plastic bottle. I can see it. It's a plastic bottle, and it's not something else. Now, there's a lot that goes into what is plastic, what is bottle, what is that. But that's what it is. I can describe it. I can actually, if I had the scientific knowledge, get down into the molecular structure, and it's real. It's actually here. It's not created by my consciousness or interpreted by my consciousness. It really is what it is. So I think what evolution has done is given us those tools
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Why is a stump and a beanbag both a chair? Well, because you're talking about
Why
the
is
self.
a stump and a beanbag both a chair? Because if you have a proper definition of a chair, then a stump and a beanbag both fit that definition.
What is the definition?
Well, I haven't thought about it, but you know, something to sit in.
That's it.
Yeah. So.
It's something to sit on.
Yeah.
Right. That isn't inherent to the object.
Sure. No. Truth is,
but my
definitions are not inherent in the object. They're objectively created by you know, my consciousness and that object.
Right.
But the object is an object, right? It's both of them are chairs, and both of them have a particular nature. That is, I can describe both. I can both say the stump and the beanbag are the same. They're a chair. But I can also say they're different. The stump is made of wood, and it has this.
Well, the problem with the idea that the object presents itself is that two things are the same and different in a near infinite number of ways. And that's also a technical problem. So I can give you an example. So imagine that you're going to classify a set of 6 books. You're going to figure out how to arrange them in your shelf. You think, well, that's an easy thing to do. That's a conceptual problem, by the way. It's actually not an easy thing to do because there is an indefinite number of ways that you can classify a finite number of objects. So you could classify the books by color, by age, by thickness, by weight, by number of E's, by number of A's, by number of E's on the first page, by number of words, by number of phrases.
Yeah, but this is where Cooper's
but
stands,
this
right?
is a big problem.
The question is, why am I classifying them? So
that is the question.
There's no intrinsic value to classifying books. The question is, why do I want to classify them? And the answer to the why I want to classify them will then determine how I classify them.
Absolutely. But that's exactly it. But that's the rub. The rub is, you see, that's the rub. Your classification system is dependent on why you apply it. And that's exactly the argument I've been using with Harris, which means the set of facts that reveal themselves to you in the world are dependent on your values. Because Sam's argument is that the values are derived from the facts. It's like, no, wait a minute. There's an infinite number of facts, and they present themselves in accordance with your values, with your purpose. And so that demolishes the values from facts argument. Now, it makes it complicated because there's an interrelationship between them, like a causal interrelationship. But it is the case that your purpose determines the facts that array themselves before you. And that's actually not disputable, I would say.
No. The facts are, the actual facts are, the actual fact is that I have 6 books, and the actual fact is that there's a infinite, if you will, way in which to order them, and that if I ordered them by E, this would be in it. So the facts are all there. When my value is introduced is how I'm going to order them. But what the purpose
or
is
even
to order
if they're
them.
books.
But the fact
they
that
might
they're
be
books
firewood.
is not.
They might be firewood. They might be a weapon.
Yeah.
There's lots of things they can be other than books.
So this is kind of amusing to me because the first... no, seriously though, because the first... I study and have written quite a bit on concept formation and classification, but whenever I'm writing about it, I don't think I've ever said this before, I remember back to when I was a little kid and I had this bookshelf and I was ordering the books on the bookshelf and I was thinking, well, what's the right way to do it? And of course the answer is that there isn't one right way built into nature. Here's how everyone's got to put into the Dewey Decimal System, and if not for Dewey, no one would have figured it out, right? There are a lot of different ways you can order books, but there are also, and anything else, right? But there are also facts about the things that make it necessary to order them in certain ways to achieve different purposes, right? And to understand them.
As long as you add that last part of the phrase.
Then there's very broad types of purposes we have to have in order to be able to think and function at all.
Yes.
And those purposes, the purpose of getting to know as much of reality as we can, of holding that reality in a way that won't flummox us, and therefore is unit economical is the word Rand sometimes uses for this. So a way that allows you to hold a lot of information in a compact number of units. And then there are certain facts we need to know and other facts we don't because of our natures, to navigate ourselves through the world, provides standards for how we conceptualize things.
Yes.
So although our purposes and our needs as human beings matter, it's not as though any purpose is just as good as any other, and you can come up with standards for objectivity of what what is an objective way to form concepts and to classify, in the same way that you can come up with standards for what's an objective way to
I don't think you can come up with it. I agree with everything you said, except I don't think you can come up with it objectively.
Well,
I even think there is a hierarchy of values, though.
Take the sense of objective, though, that's involved in objective grading or objective reporting, right? It's not that the grade's already out there in the paper and you just got to find it in there, or the newspaper story's already written and a good reporter will find it. It's rather there's a way, maybe not just one, but a small range of them, right? A way that this has to be done in order to accomplish legitimate purposes for doing it.
Yes, there's a finite range of organizing things that will enable you to use them in a reasonable way.
And that's what we mean when we talk about an article being written objectively, a paper being graded objectively. And I think in the same sense you could talk about a concept being formed objectively or values being formed objectively.
Okay. Right, look. There's a lot in that.
Hullabaloo for objectivity.
Well, there's a lot in that I think is dead on. Like I do believe, for example, that one of the ways we deal with the fact that there's a plethora of facts is that we impose interpretive structures on those facts that are common to all of us because we have common goals. Like we don't want to suffer and die, generally speaking. We want to stay alive, and our biological systems predispose us to act in ways that are commensurate with that. And so I don't think there's an infinite number of solutions to the fact that there's an infinite number of problems. That's where I think the postmodernists have gone wrong. But I think that when you say that what you've produced by constraining the solution set is somehow akin to objectivity, that's where I have a conceptual problem, even though I don't disagree with the reason that you would make that case. Then I guess what would happen is we'd have to define what constitutes objective. Because when I think of objective, I think about the strict application of the scientific method. And what that's done for us is lay out a world not of values, but of objective facts. If you're objective, you can lay out the objective facts, but I can't see how you can derive the damn values. Even though I do believe that there's a hierarchy of values and that there's a finite hierarchy, I don't think putting that into the category of objective truth is reasonable, because I don't think that those truths are objective. There's some other form of truth. Well, and I think that that's generally captured in something like metaphor and narrative, which
I think Dave's going to push us to move on in a minute. I want to say one thing if I can before.
I actually wasn't. I was thinking that maybe we dump the Q&A and just keep going because so.
Wow, applause for not asking questions. So I just wanted to say, so first, I totally agree. One of these issues
we won't fully dump it. We'll do about 10 more here.
One of these issues is how do we define objectivity? And this is another one of these classifying questions, right? And that's an interesting question. Where does this concept come from? There's a whole history to it. There have been books written about the history of the concept objectivity, and that's something maybe for another occasion. But let's flag that as a really interesting question. As for, just want to say something about is-ought before we, and also something about whether we can get to the same conclusion starting from different places. I see what Harris is doing is he's in the tradition of a lot of empiricists. It goes back to Epicurus. It's definitely present in Mill and in a different kind of way in Hume, though very different in Hume and Adam Smith. If you're an empiricist, you think everything comes from perception, and you usually have a kind of fairly atomized view of perception. You think of it as collections of sensations. And what these types of empiricists generally do when they get to ethics is they pick some sensation to identify their value terms with. So either pain, maybe the sensation of pain is, or the sensation of suffering is the one Sam uses, right, is the bad, and then whatever's opposite to that, pleasure is the good. Some of them say the sensation of desire fulfillment, but they pick some sensation, some simple psychological state that can be experienced in a moment, and identify that with the good, and then they come up with some theory about, how do we get as many of those moments or as much of them as possible? That's famously what John Stuart Mill does, Epicurus in a very different way. And if you think you can derive values from facts like that, I think that's the mistake. I don't even think that's really deriving values from facts. All that's doing is identifying values with certain very, very simple facts. So what I think the real question about deriving values from facts is we have these value concepts like good and bad, that we use to direct ourselves through life. How do we form these concepts? And can these concepts be formed based on facts in an objective manner, as opposed to just being found out there already, or just being made up, and you can make up yours and I can make up mine, and there's no way to tell if the Nazis or the Ku Klux Klan or the communists or we are right about what the values are. So I think we have to take this question back to the broader question of how do you form concepts? And what kind of ways does perceptual evidence play in the forming of concepts? And in the case of value concepts, and here I'm drawing on Rand as I usually do, what I think we do is at the deepest level, it comes from the needs of living organisms. There are certain ways they need to function in order to survive and prosper. And values are the way that we conceptualize that. They're the conceptualization, so a human value held in conceptual form is an identification of something a human being needs to live. And he values it insofar as he chooses to live, and in some form recognizes that it will contribute to his life. But what I think ethics as a branch of philosophy, as a science in effect has to do, is really articulate the foundations of these values, where they come from, what the fundamental values are, what the fundamental ways of achieving them are.
So how would you distinguish your perspective from the perspective of a Darwinian pragmatist then?
So let me just say one more before I get to that.
Yeah.
So, but doing that as a philosopher is a pretty sophisticated thing. People don't start doing philosophy until thousands of years, more than that, until living as human beings. This particular theory of the origin of values didn't come about until the 1950s. So in some sense, prior to that, human beings were identifying things as values in conceptual terms. We learn it as we're kids. We learn that some things are good and some things are bad. And what a philosophical theory of values is meant to do is to articulate why that works, what it is that we're doing better when we do that. But other people who don't have the same theory than us will have some of the same values. And so we might come to the same conclusions, but without being able to fully defend and articulate them in the same way. So I don't think it's a coincidence that both of us think the Nazis were bad and the communists were bad, even though we start in some sense from different places. But I think to fully develop and understand what's bad about them and to come out consistently on the more difficult cases of what's good and bad, although the Nazis was a really difficult case for a lot of people, we should remember, and the communists still is. That's where we need, I think, to get down to the foundation. Now, you were asking me about the Darwinian approach.
Well, because, you know, if you're making the claim, which I think is it's a justifiable claim, whether or not it's accurate, is that our ethics are grounded in something like the necessity. We could say the necessity for survival and reproduction, which are variants of survival, obviously. That's a Darwinian claim. It's the claim that the American pragmatists advanced as well, because this is Peirce and William James and primarily.
Dewey, yeah.
You know, they believe that your knowledge was a tool. Knowledge was a tool to advance being in the world, let's say, survival in the world, and that you justified your knowledge not because you had final knowledge of anything, but because your tools were good enough to obtain the end that you were aiming at. That was the validation process. If your theory was good enough to get you to where you were aiming, then it was true enough. And the pragmatists believed that that was the best that you could do with truth. And then when Darwin advanced his theory, the American pragmatists said, oh, look, Darwin's theory is actually an extension of pragmatism. And pragmatism is the notion that your truths are good enough to facilitate your survival. But this is the rub. So that's Darwin. There's a truth that's embedded in the Darwinian worldview. That is not the same truth that's embedded in the Newtonian worldview. There's a conflict between those two. And the Newtonian worldview is basically the world of facts, right? Roughly speaking. And there's a set of claims about truth that are based in a Newtonian worldview. And they're not the same as the ones that are based in the Darwinian point of view. It's a big problem. And part of the reason that I've been arguing with Sam for like 3 years is because he's an evolutionary psychologist in principle and a biological thinker, and yet he essentially has a Newtonian worldview, that it's the world of facts that's real. It's like, no, there's a world of values, and the world of values is devoted not towards determining what's objectively true, but towards facilitating survival, and those are not the same thing. Now, there's obviously a relationship between them because the world of values and the world of facts coexists, but the relationship doesn't seem to be one-to-one.
I mean, the world of values assumes a valuer. That is, the world of facts, there are facts out there. That's the Newtonian physics. There really is a world out there. There really are facts out there. Values exist here, exist in the mind of individuals. We value something. There are no values out there independent of a valuer. So these are two different dimensions.
And
they work, part of valuing is identifying the facts.
Yes. This is the rub. That's
it's funny,
the problem.
He even used your hand motions there to get the whole thing together. Yeah, he did.
I mean, the American pragmatists are interesting philosophically, and there are some things I like about them. And one is they really stress the importance of activity and thought. You know, thoughts don't just, the world doesn't just come to you. You have to do something to think, right? And so they really stress the activity of the mind, and they really stress the role of ideas in action. And I think that's something that's left out in a lot of philosophy. But I think they lose the reality in doing that. So they treat it as though consciousness is just something that's running your life. And your ideas are just what your mind's busy doing. But I think what we know and can tell to be the case when we just introspect on our own consciousness and think about what it is to be conscious is that to be conscious is to be conscious of something, to be conscious of something independent of yourself. There's a world out there, and what we mean by consciousness is a grasp of an awareness of that world. We wouldn't even be able to get the idea of our own consciousness except by contrast to a world that we're distinguishing it from. You close your eyes and you open them and you think the thing's still there. You know, you have the idea of a world that's there, and then your consciousness is of that world. And I think you have to have that idea of knowledge, and knowledge being about something that's independent of you. And I think the pragmatists lose that. I think there's this kind of dichotomy we find in thought between everything's in your head, and your mind's very active in your knowing the world and you're deciding things, and therefore you don't actually get at the world the way it actually is. And then on the other side, you do get at the world the way it actually is, but because you don't do anything. It just comes to you passive. And I think both of those are wrong. There's activity you have to do to get at the world, but it's activity to get at the way the world is. And of course, you get it in a certain form. Just like if I pick something up, I'm holding it in one form, and I could hold it in a different form, you know. But I'm still holding it. It's not like I'm not getting it in.
I think
and likewise for values.
I think the pragmatists do retain the world, but they look at it slightly different. They say, the world is what objects to your stupid theory. So let's say so it's not that the world is made of objects. The world is made of what objects to your stupid theory. That's a whole different idea, and it's a way more sophisticated idea. And so for the pragmatists, if you lay out a theory in the world in action, and the action obtains its end, then the theory is sufficiently true. But you know, lots of times when you lay out your theory in the world, you don't get what you expected. And then the question is, what do you get? And you might say, well, you get an array of new facts. It's like, no, that's not what happens. What you get is an array of new incomprehensible possibilities. And that's not the same thing as a set of facts. So let me give you an example. You'll all understand this very rapidly. Imagine you're married to someone and you trust them and they betray you. And you discover that one day. So that's the world objecting to your stupid theory. That's for sure. Because you had a theory about who you were, and a theory about who your partner was, and a theory about what your life was, and that theory was seriously wrong. Past, present, and future are all something radically new. You might say, well, a new set of facts confronts you. Really? Is that right? Okay. Just what are those facts? It's like you'll be in a pit for 2 or 3 years trying to just get the bare facts out of that situation. The only thing you'll know for sure when the world objects to your stupid theory is that you were wrong. It's not like the world is going to array itself. It's like, who is this person that I was married to? That's what's going to be the question. And the question is, what kind of fool was I for making these presuppositions to begin with? And it's not like that new knowledge will manifest itself in a set of instantly apprehensible facts about the true nature of the world. You're going to be suffering like mad for a very good long time before you can take what you have, which isn't facts, but just confusion, and transform that into something that's even vaguely resembling a set of apprehensible facts. You'll be in serious psychological trouble until the world re-reveals itself as a set of apprehensible facts. And if you're traumatized badly enough, it'll never happen. And so that's another part of the problem with the idea that the world just represents itself as facts from which you can derive values. It's like, not when you're bloody confused, and you're confused a lot, and you're confused when the range of potential that's manifested exceeds your grasp, exceeds your capabilities. And then the way you respond to that isn't even cognitively. The way you respond to that, this is part of embodied cognition. What do you do when something incomprehensible objects to you? Well, it depends on how incomprehensible it is, but let's say, what did you do when the Twin Towers fell? Was it a set of facts? It's like you didn't know what the hell was going on, and neither did anyone else. What you did was go into a state of crisis. And that state of crisis is actually an embodied precognitive response. And what happens biologically is that you get flooded with cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and what it does is prepare you to take a very large array of potential actions. That's your response. So it's not like the world has arrayed itself as a set of facts from which you can derive value. What happens is the world has arrayed itself as an incomprehensible mystery, and you have to do something about that, and what you do is ratchet up your physiology so that you're burning yourself up, because you age faster when this sort of thing happens, which is why you age faster if you're in crisis. You burn yourself up in the attempt to do everything at once, to prepare to do everything at once. And that's really the world manifesting itself as an object and objecting to your theory. It doesn't come out as an array of facts. It would be so lovely if every time you were wrong, what happened was a new array of facts manifested itself.
The point is that the reality doesn't just show up. It's not just an array of facts, but when that cortisol happens, when that event happens, what you do is consciously make an effort to go find the facts. If you
for sure.
So the facts are still in reality. So something happened in 9/11. So the first thing you do is, what actually happened? You have to figure out what actually happened. There's real work and real cognitive effort. Who are these people? What is the ideology driving them? Why did they do it? All of these things are facts that exist in reality, and your responsibility, your moral responsibility, I think, to yourself, is to go find and discover the facts that are relevant for the decisions and the actions you need to take, given the event that's happened. So, yes, psychologically, if you discover your wife's betraying you, you're confused, but I think your job as a human being is, okay, what actually happened? And where did I make my mistake? So it's hard. But this is part of what free will is. Free will is that engaging reason, engaging our consciousness to discover the facts out there and apply them to making a new conclusion, right? Okay, so something's wrong in my evaluation of my wife. What was it? Did she really betray me? Are the facts true? Is what's going on here real? So all of it is, again, a return to reason, a return to discovery of facts, which is what reason does.
Okay, so two things. First, you mentioned the relevant facts, and that's the rub. But I would also say, interestingly enough, in relationship to your argument, the developmental psychologist Jean Piaget made a very similar claim. He said that because the domain of established facts was mutable, and that's the issue, say, with the fact that your partner could betray you, even what you know can be mutable, right? Then what is relevant in the search for truth isn't the search for a set of immutable facts, but a search for the process by which facts are generated from the chaotic potential to begin with. It's not exactly how Piaget worded it, but
the facts are there. Your wife is either betraying you or she's not betraying you. It's not, there's always a potential, there's lots of potentialities. But she's either betraying you or she's not betraying you. And your job is to discover whether she is or she isn't, right? If that's the job you've assigned yourself, right? So the reality is what it is. It's not dependent on you discovering it or not. Your responsibility, if you're married, is to know whether your wife is betraying you or not. Hopefully you don't need to do the exercise because she's not, and you have trust in that. But your consciousness is identifying the truth of what's out there. It's not some array of infinite possibilities. She could be betraying you. She could be half betraying you. She can't be half betraying you, just like she can't be half pregnant. So there are two possibilities. She's either betraying you, she's not. And your job is to apply reason, which I take as identifying what is true and what is not, what is factual and what is not, what is the evidence, weighing the evidence. And then there's a whole psychological assessment of why did this happen to me? What did I see? Did I screw up? Did she screw up? Why was my assessment before? But that's a separate question. First, did she or didn't she? So it strikes me as this is relatively simple, right? The facts are what they are. Our job is to discover them.
And let me say about this, the world objecting to your theory. It's certainly true that the world objects to stupid theories. If you've got them, try it out. But I don't take that as a definition of the world. It's one fact about the world. And more importantly, it's a fact about our theories, that they better match the world. Otherwise, we're going to have trouble with them. And when you get into this situation, and this is what the pragmatists take it too often, as though the theory is just there. We're not too interested in how it got there, except by repeated episodes of what's about to happen, which is that the world objects to it, and then you go scrambling to try to get out of this state of cognitive dissonance that you're in because of the objection. So, Dewey says at one point, thought's a disease, right? Everything's easy and nice. You don't have to think, you just go by in some stupor, he wouldn't put it that way. But, and then some fact objects, and now or the world objects, and now you've in dissonance, and you've got to figure out how to reconfigure your mental life so that you can get on with it. And that is what a lot of people did after 9/11, right? A lot of people, something unexpected and horrible happened, and what they were motivated to do was figure out what are the fewest moves I can make to get things to go back to normal and be all right. I don't care what's true. I don't care who really did this. I don't care what would really solve it. I just care what I can tell myself to make this confusion and disruption and agitation go away. And that's dishonesty, and that's wrong. And to really value honesty and wanting to get the right answer and being rational in these situations and caring about what happens to your damn life. You can't say, you know, oh, I just want to be back into blissful oblivion by coming up with some new theory.
Why do you think
how can I tell
wrong?
what went wrong in the first place? I got to this theory somehow.
Yeah.
Now I see that the theory is wrong. What mistake did I make along the way? What was the process by which I generated this theory? And what was the misstep in that process? How can I fix it to generate a new theory, one that will be true? And that process by which you generate your theories, it's a process of forming concepts, it's a process of collecting evidence. It's a complicated process. There's a lot to say about it, right?
Sounds like repentance and atonement to me.
Well, it can be, okay. But it's in that you're acknowledging an error and you're trying to fix it, but you're trying to see how you made this theory and how you can make it better. And if this idea that philosophy and real thinking starts when you come to contradictions. You get this back in the Greeks with the dialectical tradition and people debating each other. And I think there's something really profound in Aristotle as opposed to Plato and the other Greeks. The other Greeks, they seem to, and then later Hegel, they come up with contradictions and they think, what can we do to get past this contradiction? But what Aristotle always does, and all of his books have this structure, and I think it's brilliant, he gets into a field by discussing the debates in it. He shows all the contradictions and all the puzzles, and it can't be this and this. And then he says, let's start fresh. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's think about how we got here. And then he crafts a new theory, starting from the kind of facts that motivated the old theories, from the kind of observations, let's say, that motivated the old theories, but that avoids the difficulties in the new one. Rather than just trying to reconfigure to go forward, you go back. And if there's a hierarchy, not just a hierarchy of values, but also a hierarchy of our understanding of the world, certain ways of understanding it are more basic and others are built up on top of that. When you find that one of your theories, and a theory is a really complex way of knowing, right? When you find that one of your theories is mistaken, you think, how can I go back to the more basic, more primitive types of knowledge, more basic types of observations, whatever it might be, from which I generated this theory, and now add to it the new observations and the new knowledge that I have based on what went wrong, and generate a new theory that will be better than it.
Yeah. Let's give Jordan the last word on this. Okay,
well, yes, but, but there's the problem is, that works. There's two problems with it, though. One is that it's really, 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 really difficult cognitively, because the more of your theory you have to unpack, like imagine that your theory is composed of presumptions, and the more basic the presumption, the more your world is organized as a consequence of that presumption. And so, like, the presumption of your partner's fidelity is a very fundamental presumption because the entire interpretation of your relationship is predicated on that assumption. And so if you let that assumption go, then you let everything that you know about your relationship go, and that casts you into chaos more and more thoroughly. So the more you go back to revise the theory, the more cognitive the dissonance idea, but the more you throw yourself into a state of existential crisis, and the more you end up psychophysiologically preparing for catastrophe as a consequence, and the faster you die. So the problem with ungluing things back down to first principles, which is actually what happens to people, by the way, when they develop post-traumatic stress disorder, is that you undo yourself in doing that. And when you undo yourself, there's a physiological price to pay. So even though that is the route out, make a fundamental error, you should make fundamental reparations. The cost of doing that is unbelievably high. And so people are loath to do it, even though they might have to do it, because, of course, you were saying it was wrong to paper over an error. Mm-hmm. And I asked, well, why is it wrong? If it makes you feel better, why is it wrong? Which is a perfectly good question. But the answer to why it's wrong is, well, what do you want to make the same stupid error again? What if the error was quasi-fatal? You make it 2 more times, you're dead. And so the cost of repeating, that's the thing about cognitive errors insofar as they're enacted. If they're errors and you make them in the world objects and it takes you apart. And if the error is profound enough, then you suffer a lot and die, and maybe not just you. Like, the errors can be really profound. So it might be that you have to fix the damn hole in your map, because otherwise you'll fall through. But that nonetheless, that the cost of doing that is so high that you're going to shy away from it. And people do that all the time. That's partly why they take the easy route. It's like they take the easy route because the difficult route is, it's difficult. It's really difficult. Well, think about what you'd have to figure out if you were subject to a betrayal like that. It's like, well, maybe you married the wrong person. That's possible. Maybe you created the wrong person in your marriage, in your interactions with your partner. Or maybe you're so damn naive that it's just absolutely beyond comprehension. Like, there's all sorts of terrible things lurking under the revelation of that objection, and digging down there to pull them out it's a hell of a job, right? That's the confrontation with the terrible dragon of chaos, and in that confrontation you can easily be burnt to a crisp. You know,
but this is partially why it's so crucial to know yourself and to build a solid foundation of self in any relationship, right? So that it's not, somebody else's betrayal does not unwind everything you think about yourself. So you can't go that every time reality doesn't match your theory, you completely unwind, right? So knowing oneself, having a solid foundation, a sense of sense of self-esteem, a sense of self-worth, a sense of confidence, and having a philosophical foundation. And this is why, as you said, it's hard work, and that we agree completely. That is, morality is hard work, living is hard work. You went back to the idea of the pragmatism and survival. One of the things that we that I hold, we hold, I think, is that survival qua human being, as a human being, with our unique features as human being, is a lot of work. And it requires particular type of work, particularly reasoning and thinking and figuring stuff out. And the more work we do, the more we build our character, the easier it is to deal with these shocks to the system. The easier it is to deal with a 9/11 or betrayal, because we know what we are, and now we just need to figure out what the facts are, and we can deal with whatever the facts are. Whatever reality throws at you, if you've done the moral work to create a moral character, you should be able to deal with it.
Well, you have your best shot at it.
Wow. I got a seriously stiff neck from looking that way the whole time. Oh, my God. Sorry, guys. How you doing over there?
That's what happens when you look left.
Yeah. Well, this was such a perfect example of why I love the reality that I like to think I created, and maybe some of it came from before me, too, because this is it. What do you think was more worthwhile, what we just did here for an hour or what was on CNN for the last hour? This really is it. And, these are huge differences, and in some ways they're small differences. And that's what I want to end for our final 5 minutes here, is why is it that so seemingly these days, so few people are willing to do this? So few people are willing to tour the country, to talk to all sorts of people about all sorts of different things and put their ideas on the line and do all the philosophical work that you do. And Yaron, you also travel the world. And it seems there's an absolute starvation for it. And yet so few people are doing it. Yaron, I'll start with you and then we'll go this way.
Well, I think because those people who don't want to have the debate have no ideas. They're really empty. They're nihilists in some cases, and in that case, what is nihilism? Nihilism is the absence. It's zero. Ayn Rand, I think, called it the worship of zero, right? It's a nothingness. They don't stand for anything. What are they going to go and do debates when they don't really represent anything other than destruction? There's nothing to talk. Reason doesn't matter. Ideas don't matter. Speech doesn't matter as a consequence. What matters is action. This is why Antifa storms into a room and, they use their fists. There's nothing for them to say. There's no value that they have to present. And I think it's true on if you will, on the rights, on the non-speech right. It's the same thing. It's my revelation, you know, Islam or Christianity or whatever the religion is, it's my revelation. It's not any debate. The truth was revealed to me. You know, there's no logic, there's no reason, there's no rationality that can challenge the fact that God spoke to me through a book or whatever the way he spoke to me, and this is the truth, and there's nothing else that can be discussed. So you've got on two sides, all they have is emotion and action. Reason, ideas, debate, discussion. As soon as you abandon reason, as soon as you abandon the idea, the conversation, the logic is the way in which we debate, discuss, and discover the truth, then now you've abandoned speech, right? So they're against free speech because they're against reason, because they're against reality. They're against
isn't
facts.
that really the beauty of this? It's not that there has to be a knockout here, that somebody has to be, you know, dragged off stage. It's that everyone, although wait for the closer, everybody.
We're going to be at one another's throats.
But that really, that everyone here, the 600 some odd people here, can take what they've heard here and then start applying their own logic and reason and figure out what they believe.
Yeah,
right?
one thing I always think and say to my students in that connection is that, you know, minds are rarely changed in the course of an argument. That doesn't mean they're not changed by an argument. But, you know, if you and I are having an argument now, it's about something important and deep. It's very unlikely that one of us at the end of the 15 minutes we're arguing is going to come away with a changed worldview. It happens occasionally, but pretty rare. But often, you know, you go home, you think about it, I think about it, and both of us improve our thinking as a result of that, and maybe sometimes you see profound changes over time. The other thing I wanted to say to your comment about why don't we see more of this, why aren't people willing to go around the country and do these kinds of talks, and it does seem like there's a hunger for it, people are turning out. One important thing with products, and you know, this is a product that we're creating here, right, for people to consume, is there's a lot of times in the world when there's a potential demand for a product and people who could create that product and nobody notices it. And it goes a long time with nobody noticing it. And what's great about entrepreneurs is they're the kind of people who notice that there's an opportunity for this. They figure it out and they create something new. And I think that's what you're doing here, right? You probably would have been willing to go on a tour a couple of years ago, and you know, Yaron would. But before it was proven that there were these people who want to hear this and there are ways to connect them together, nobody would have known to do it. And so what all of you guys are doing in this connection, and particularly Dave, what you're doing in bringing all these people together on these long-form talk shows, I think is fantastic. And it's creating this kind of value. And I see it as one of the things that's one of the hopeful signs in the culture that's combating the signs that Yaron talked about on both political sides.
You can either take us out soft or go for the kill. The choice is yours. They're a very friendly group of people.
Well, look, I mean, if you're going to talk about, if you're going to dare to think publicly about difficult things, to think and speak publicly about difficult things, then you're going to cause trouble, because you can't talk about something difficult without causing trouble. If it was easy, then everyone would agree, and then you could talk about it. No one would care because everyone already knew, but it would be easy. But if it's difficult and you talk about it, then you're going to upset people. And then when you upset people, they're going to yell at you a lot. And then, well, that's what's going to happen. And then, you know, if you're not sure that there's any support for your position, or even if you're sort of vaguely human and it upsets you to be yelled at by many, many people, you know, you tend to shut up if a whole bunch of people are yelling at you, because you might be wrong and also you might be in danger. But what happens right now is that, well, two things. One thing to know is that just because some people yell at you right now doesn't mean that all people will yell at you over the next month, right? So the people who are being thoughtful about it are going to be quieter, and they might be sort of hiding in the woodwork. And so you have to learn that. But then the other thing is, and we've talked about this quite a bit in this tour, is that there's a technological revolution that's occurring that's enabling these long-form conversations. And it wasn't possible before. Like, we can live stream this, right, for no cost. And so a whole bunch of people can watch this. And the technology's there. And it turns out that the technology has revealed to us the fact that there's a collective starvation for deep, long-form discussion. And so hooray for that. And so maybe that niche will be increasingly filled. It seems to be happening. And so, and that would be a good thing, because it seems to me that the way out of our current state of idiot political polarization isn't the final establishment that one side is right and the other is wrong, but to engage in sophisticated long-form discussions to deal with the actual problems that are producing the polarization. And maybe we can do that, and maybe this is part of the process by which we do that successfully. And that would be a testament to the utility of the reason that you were describing, which is the only alternative to subjugation or violence, right? We either talk it through, we capitulate, or we tyrannize. Those are the options. So.
Well, on that note, keep it going for talking it through and for these three guys who presented their ideas. And thank you guys for coming out. Thank you for watching on the YouTube.
So I assume you're all here to talk about the early work of Carl Jung and this man's carnivorous diet and the Soviet art he collects. No, in all seriousness, I'm really excited to be here with you. We've never met before. Your official title is that you are a clinical psychologist and a professor at the University of Toronto. You've written 2 books, one called Maps of Meaning and the best-selling 12 Rules for Life, which is currently being translated into 40 languages. But this description does not capture what you've become, which is a kind of phenomenon. When I was reading 12 Rules for Life in a cafe in the locker room of my gym, it was sitting out on a bench, people were coming up to me and saying, "This book saved my life." And yet there are other people in the country, including some of my fellow journalists, who insist that you are actually a gateway drug to the far right. So I'm excited to be here with you, not the myth of you, but with the man. And I'm hoping we can use this hour or so to talk about your views on meaning, on gender, on feminism, God, higher education, and I'm sure we can solve all of that in under an hour. So I want to start with the book 12 Rules for Life, which I'm hoping some of you have read. Here are some of the messages in that book. Gender isn't a social construct. People should strive for meaning in their lives, not happiness. Life is suffering, but there are ways to transcend it. Stand up straight, make your bed. Now, all of this to me seems pretty commonsensical. And yet, I don't think that there is a Canadian in the world that I've read more think pieces about. I don't think it's a stretch to say that you are sort of the most loved and loathed public intellectual in the Western world at the moment. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what that's like and your understanding of it. You've just come from 2 days in Vancouver where, on an event with Sam Harris, talking for over 2 hours about the question of truth, and 5,000 people showed up to those events, not exactly a sexy Beyonce concert. What's going on? How do you understand it and your place in it?
Well, I think you don't want to underestimate the role that technological transformation is playing in this. You know, I've been thinking about YouTube and podcasts quite intensely for about 2 years. So I started putting my university lectures on YouTube in 2013. And I did that for a variety of reasons, mostly curiosity, because and the drive to learn. And I've found that if I want to learn a technology, the best way to do it is to use it. And I'm always learning new technologies because, well, not that that makes me particularly unique, but, and I had some success with my lectures on public television in Canada. So I did some lectures with a series called Big Ideas on Canadian public television, and there was about 200 of those lectures, and I did 5 of them. 200 done by 200 different people, but I did 5 of them, and they were regularly in the top 10 of the most viewed lectures. And so I knew that there was some broader market for, let's say, ideas. And I thought, well, I might as well put my lectures up on YouTube and see what happens. And then by April of 2016, I had 1 million views. And I thought, the only reason people are watching these is because they want to watch them, because they're actually really hard. And 1 million of something is a lot. If you sell 1 million copies of your book, well, first of all, that never happens, right? I mean, it's very, very rare. You're very happy. You never have your scientific papers cited 1 million times. You rarely have $1 million. It's a very large number. And I thought, well,
this room accepted. But
well, fair enough. Fair enough.
Guys.
And of course, it's not as uncommon as it once was, but it's still a significant number. And I didn't really have any way of calibrating that. I thought, well, what am I supposed to do now that I hit 1 million views? How am I supposed to conceptualize that? What is this YouTube thing anyways that was once a repository for cute cat videos? And what does it mean to have 1 million views on it? And I thought, and so I really started to think about it because, you know, and there were a lot of people commenting as well, and they were into the lectures and following them avidly. And I thought, okay, so what is this YouTube exactly? And I thought, well, for the first time in human history, the spoken word has the same reach as the written word. And not only that, no lag to publication and no barrier to entry. That's a major technological revolution. That's a Gutenberg revolution. That's a big deal. This is a game changer. And then it was soon after that that I discovered the podcast world, which is about 10 times as big as the YouTube world. And the podcast world is also a Gutenberg revolution, except it's even more extensive, because the problem with books and videos is that you can't do anything else while you're doing them, right? When you're reading, you're reading. When you're watching a video, you know, you can be distracted, but you have to pay attention to the video. But if you're listening to a podcast, you can be driving a forklift or a long-haul truck, or you can be exercising or doing the dishes. And so what that means is that podcasts free up, say, 2 hours a day for people to engage in educational activities that they wouldn't otherwise be able to engage in, and that's about 1/8 of people's lives. So podcasts hand people 1/8 of their life back to engage in high-level education. So then I thought, well, people actually want to do this. There's a massive market for high-level intellectual engagement that's much deeper and more desperate, let's say, than anyone suspected. We really saw that in Vancouver. You know, I mean, the discussion I had with Sam Harris, the 2 discussions, we talked about the relationship between facts and values. Was really and science and religion more peripherally. But the dialogue was conducted at the level, I would say, approximately at the level of a pretty rigorous PhD defense. And we were only supposed to talk for an hour and then go to Q&A, but the crowd didn't want us to stop. And so we talked the first night for 2.5 hours and the second night for 2.5 hours, and the crowd was 100% on board the entire time. And it wasn't because Sam was winning or I was winning. Neither of us, in fact, were trying to win. We were trying to learn something, and we were actually trying to learn something. We weren't just pretending to do that. And, you know, the place erupted at the end. And I think one of the things I've realized in the last couple of days as I've been thinking this through is that the narrow bandwidth of TV has made us think we're stupider than we are. And so people have a real hunger for deep intellectual dialogue, and that can be met with these new technologies, and that has revolutionary significance, and that's starting to unfold.
I wonder about, you love to quote this line, this Nietzsche line, that anyone who has a why to live for can endure almost any how.
Yeah.
What's your why? What is driving you? You are the most busy man. I mean, to get you here, you know, I think you're like wherever you were last night, in Portland tomorrow. Like, I don't know how you're alive, frankly, right now. What is driving you? Like, what is this relentless drive? What are you pushing toward?
I'm trying to, well, when I spent 15 years writing the first book I wrote, which is called Maps of Meaning, and it's akin to 12 Rules to Life, although it's a much more difficult book. The audio version of that book is out now, by the way. It's been out since June 12th, and I would, if you like 12 Rules or you were interested in it, then you could try that. I think the audio version is much more accessible because it's a difficult book. Getting the cadences of the sentences right is an aid to comprehension. I spent 15 years writing that book, about 3 hours a day writing, and a lot more time reading. And I was interested in solving a problem, which was, I was interested in the great atrocities of the 20th century, the ones that were committed on the right and the ones that were committed on the left, but I was interested in that psychologically. And what that meant was, had I been there, what could have I done to not participate? And so that's what I've been trying to figure out. Because for me, what happened in Nazi Germany and what happened in the Gulag Archipelago and in Maoist China, many places, was sufficient definition.
That's not turn. I don't need a zoom lens for my face, but I do need a zoom lens for the desk.
Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Francis, and this is a video I've been meaning to make for a couple of weeks now. This video is going out to the folks over at PlayStation. It's been a while since your head was on the chopping block, but now it's time to chop. Actually, it hurt a little bit. Let me ask you something, Sony. How come can't we have crossplay? How come can't we have crossplay? Because people have been wanting crossplay on your system ever since Rocket League came out, okay? And the folks over Rocket League said, we love crossplay. Well, Nintendo will even let us have crossplay. PC and Xbox will let me have crossplay. Why won't you let them have crossplay for Rocket League, okay? You have any idea what kind of lonely loser it takes to be playing Rocket League still, okay? Those guys deserve any help they can get. Okay, but now it's starting to affect real gamers, okay? Not just these Rocket League nerds. Because it's affecting Fortnite. And I like Fortnite. I play that game all the time. It's one of my favorite games to play. But I can't play it on the Nintendo Switch because I created my account and bought stuff through the PlayStation Store. And when I try to boot it up on my Nintendo Switch, I get an error message that says that I can't do it because that account is locked to PlayStation. Locked to PlayStation. What? I mean, I get it. If you don't want to have crossplay, I get it. You know, what are you afraid PlayStation players aren't good enough at Fortnite that they're not going to be able to play the game? Okay, they get paired against people on PC, they're going to get their asses beat? You're right. That's exactly what'll happen, okay? I understand that part, okay? But this isn't crossplay. You're not even letting me play the same game on a different fucking system. You shouldn't have any control over that. Because right now, you got a happy little gaming ecosystem. You got the Nintendo Switch, playing with the PC players, playing with the Xbox players, and then up here you got the PlayStation guys over here in the corner all alone, thinking they're better than everybody else. Oh, I don't need to be part of this little circle jerk. Yeah, let me trust me, you fucking want to be part of this little circle jerk. It's Fortnite we're talking about. Here's a little history lesson for you folks over there at PlayStation. You remember last generation when Xbox was up here in their little ivory tower and poor little PlayStation was down here in the shitstorm sewers, right? And Nintendo, I don't know what the fuck they were doing. Because last generation Xbox was up here, and they were just raining diarrhea down on you 24 hours a day, and making anti-consumer decisions, getting into bed with EA, inventing DLC, inventing microtransactions, all that stupid shit, and you were down here trying to create good single-player games, being all consumer-friendly, and so when the generation came around, we swapped you around. We just threw this little shit-fest into the garbage. But must be something about the altitude all the way up there on top, okay? Because you guys are raining diarrhea down on your consumers just like Xbox did. Now, what do you think's going to happen next generation, assholes, all right? It's simple. Crossplay. Let me play my Fortnite account wherever I want to play the fucking thing. Oh, and I've heard the message, PlayStation. We're listening. We're listening. Hey, I got an idea. How about you get off your ass and actually fix something instead of just listening? Actually do something! And now it's gotten so bad that even the living meme himself, Todd Howard, the walking cringe fest that is Todd Howard, has single-handedly blamed your company and your policies for Fallout 76 not having crossplay because all you guys do is listen, okay? Todd Howard is literally raining diarrhea down on your head, and this generation isn't even over. How do you think the next one's gonna go, assholes?
Hi everybody, it's me, Todd Howard, and I've got a very special announcement. The multiplayer version of Skyrim will not be available on the PlayStation because the people at PlayStation are stuck-up shitheads.
No, I don't want to see you guys fail like this, not like this. PlayStation, why? I trusted you! You were the chosen one! Ah! Okay, I know it's not as easy as pressing a button. I understand, okay? Maybe crossplay can come later this year, but for now, fix this Fortnite shit.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? BBM2K18 coming at you live once again through the power of the internet. And this is my rambling series. It's kind of like a little podcast or a vlogging series in which I just kind of talk about life in the universe and things around us and things that are particularly interesting to me. Those of you who are coming in for the first time to the series from the H3 podcast, I welcome you to it. I will warn you, this is a very amateur style. I just sit down and talk to the camera like I'm talking to you. No editing, no post-processing, nothing else. And I do get lost in my train of thought occasionally, so that's why I call it a rambling video. It's a great video to put on in the background while you're doing other stuff because it tends to go long, 10 or 15 minutes, and I hope you guys enjoy that kind of thing. But I want to talk a little bit about my VidCon this year because this year's VidCon was the best VidCon of my life, and I've done 5 now. It's one of the best conventions I've ever had. This summer has turned out to be one of the best summers I've ever had, and it was also simultaneously one of the worst summers I've ever had, one of the worst years I've ever had, the worst convention season I've ever had. And I want to talk about all of the good and the bad here. And it's going to get a little bit political, so for those of you who are triggered by that kind of thing, I'm going to try to save it towards the end. But I'm going to talk about the personal stuff first. But for those of you who don't care about that kind of thing, I'll warn you before we get into the politics and the society-based stuff. So bear with me. Also, stick it to the end of the videos. That way it's less likely that the people who hate that kind of thing and attack people for that kind of thing will be less likely to get triggered or upset or attacked or defend themselves is how some of them people feel. That's fine. Anyway, so as you guys know, I went through gastric bypass surgery you're getting close to a year ago. And in that period of time, I lost about 180 pounds, a little closer to 185 now. And I'm feeling really good, feeling really solid. I'm finally building muscle and I'm finally able to walk and I'm finally able to get around. I can't walk as much as I would like because I still am dealing with some pain issues. So I still have to use a motorized scooter. And that actually was one of the biggest sources of frustration and pain for me this year because I was in so much less pain than I've ever been in, but I was in some pain. Some days I would just completely skip my pain medication because even though I was in pain, I was in enough pain to where I could just manage it. When I did the H3 podcast last year, I was in so much pain that day that I could barely stand the car ride there and the car ride back, but we did good. We did well. This year, I was in a good mood when I did the show. I was in a good mood during the show, before and after, on the ride there, on the ride back. Just an amazing experience. It's so different, the changes to my body has made for me. And for those of you who, again, are considering, I need to start doing that. I need to do better. Maybe I need to start losing weight. Maybe I need to consult with a gastric surgeon. Maybe I need to start working out. Maybe I need physical therapy. Please don't wait, because the quicker you do that, the quicker you're going to have that kind of success, the quicker you're going to have the kind of good feelings that I'm having. So please learn from my bad lessons by not doing the stupid things I have done in the past or some of the stupid mistakes I'm making now, and learn from the good things that I've done and fix yourself and fix your body and do the things you need to do. No, I'm not no one to lecture you. It's just a suggestion, because Lord knows it took me forever to even start the process, and I still have a long ways to go. So the ability to walk around VidCon, the ability to walk around the parties, and the ability to do more and book more meetings and meet more creators and meet more fans and sign for longer and do more panels and all of that stuff was fantastic. And the feedback that I got from the other creators, from the fans, from everyone involved, and that includes E3 as well, the Creator Summit as well, from the YouTube team, just this miraculous, wonderful, nice feeling of like accomplishment and success and happiness that I have not been able to feel in a really, really long time. And I was not in so much pain that I couldn't enjoy it. I could enjoy every second of it because here I am doing better than I've ever done in my life. I have not been this small since I was in high school. And that's saying something because I'm still a very large guy. The downside is I'm still carrying the weight of that divorce on my heart and on my head. It was my first time at the Anaheim Convention Center or downtown Disney without my ex-wife. That was tremendously difficult. I thought about her just about everywhere we went because these are places we shared. We slept in the same hotel. We went to the same rooms. We went to the same stores. We went to the same restaurants. That's hard to do without your life partner that you were with for 7 years. And I did talk to her throughout the trip and share some stuff with her, and that was kind of nice. I'm so glad we still have the capacity to do that. But overall, that's a very difficult thing to do with. It's also very difficult to deal with some of the backlash that I was getting from Twitter, from elsewhere, for some of the stupid shit I've said and done in my past. I understand where the backlash is coming from. I understand where people, dislike what I have to say and how they feel. But my mental illness, my anxiety, my depression, my suicidal thoughts, my crazy tendencies were certainly glaring throughout all of this conventions through the summer. And it's so frustrating because they talk about something called imposter syndrome, where you feel like you don't really belong to be where you're supposed to be. You're not one of the people. You're not one of the things. And it turns out I talk to a lot of YouTube creators, and we all feel that way. Right up to the top. I'm not going to name any names, but I've heard that from a lot of people. Do we deserve the success? Do we deserve the things we got? It's amazing that we get this stuff. It isn't bizarre. Some of us process it positively, like, wow, I'm the luckiest person in the world. Other people process it like, I don't deserve this shit. I can't wait till they take it away from me so I can go back to being miserable. But we all feel that way. And I don't know. As usual, mental health is always a big topic at VidCon for me. I will talk to creators and I will talk to fans who are dealing with all kinds of miserable stuff in their lives, creators who are dealing with all kinds of miserable stuff in their lives. And this year, and keep in mind, when I go to VidCon, I talk to everybody. I will talk to people on the alt-right. I'll talk to people on the far left. I'll talk to, people of every color, every shape, every size, every political dialogues and ideologues. I don't care. I don't care. People are people. I can learn from people. I can commiserate with people. There are a handful of people I don't want to talk to. You could probably name a couple of them right now. But they're very, very few. I will give anybody the time of day. I will take a photo with anybody. I will, maybe even sit down and have lunch with you if you want to debate me mano a mano. But I don't want to debate you. I don't want to argue about that stuff there. What I want to, when I talk to somebody whose point of view I don't agree with, I talk to them about how can we do this better? How can we be better? How can we rise above? How can we create better content? Maybe we could go back to creating content that's fun and enjoyable and entertaining people. Maybe we could work more towards that. Is there any ideas that you have that would just be fun, that would be rewarding for you, that would be rewarding for your fans, instead of all engaging in all this negativity and all this craziness? And some people, I understand, do not have the option to do that. Some people, their entire lives is just built off of being hated on, so they have to hate back. I understand that. But those of us who do have alternatives, maybe we can find better alternatives. I will say that to just about any creator who will listen to me, and most of them will. And most of them agree. They're saying, I feel so compelled to create that content, and I try. It's just, it's been squashed out of me. It's just been crushed out of me because I get criticism for everything I do. So many YouTubers saying, I'm ready to quit. So many YouTubers saying, I can't handle the stress. So many YouTubers saying, I can't handle the political climate. So many YouTubers saying that to me this year. More said that to me than didn't, and I was very surprised. Some of them are so much more successful than me, and they were just frustrated and burnout and in a lot of pain, but know that this is their job and this is what they need to do, so they continue to do it because they do know they're doing some good. They do know they're entertaining people, and they're certainly earning a living, which we all have to do. It's just so difficult. And to know how many YouTubers are in crisis, to know how many YouTubers are struggling, to know how many of them are just dealing with the world that we live in and how difficult it is to perform in this way, it's really something. It's really something. And you don't have to feel bad for me. That's fine. I was built for this. I was built to be miserable. You guys forget, I was born into misery, molded by it. You just adopted the misery. I'm built for this. I'm made for this. I function better when I'm miserable. I function better when I'm mentally ill. When I'm happy, I don't know what to do with it. So that's fine by me. It's so difficult to see other creators in this tremendous state of some of the stuff I've been dealing with ever since I was a kid. They don't deserve it. Nobody deserves that. I didn't deserve it either. So nobody deserves it. Here's what I will say about mental health, and this is the best part about VidCon this year. It's why it was one of the most healing VidCons in the world. I got a chance to talk to some really incredible people, and again, I would mention them by name here, but I don't want to dox anybody. I don't want to bring any hate anybody's way, and I know there's a lot of people watching me right now who are here just to tear me apart, looking for me to say something very stupid in this video, which I probably already have, and if not, stick around. But they're people who work in the mental health field. And whether it was somebody who brought along their beautiful little therapy dog who gave me an opportunity to just post and relax, or the fact that there was even like a puppy corral that creators could visit, and bunnies and play with puppies and play with bunnies and relax and just enjoy some good food and some good drinks and commiserate and celebrate everything great about what we do. And then we could walk into the fans and shake their hands and do signings and do panels and talk about all of this awesome stuff. So many panels, though, were dedicated to so much of this toxicity and so much of this misery. And VidCon does a very good job of making it very positive. The panels are not about who sucks and why they suck and why they suck. And it's more about celebrating people who get that kind of hate. Whether you are short or tall, fat or skinny, it doesn't matter, male or female, black or white, doesn't matter. You have an opportunity to speak at VidCon and speak your mind and celebrate what you do and talk about the problems that you are having. But there were so many mental health panels this year, and I just want to celebrate that about VidCon. I think that was so amazing, and so many mental health YouTubers were there who had this opportunity, and we all bonded. I talked to so many incredible people. I made so many new friends, whether it was bringing their little puppy over so that they could talk for a little while, or talking to me about my divorce, or talking about the issues I've been having with the stuff that I've been dealing with. This was the year that instead of everybody talking to me and me trying to help them, and a handful of people letting me talk to them, this year it was mostly me talking to them and getting some of the help I desperately needed. And it made me want to come back home and just get with my therapist through that program that sponsors me, and talk to them even more and practice even more and really, really get some of this poison out of me and get some of this stuff out of me. Because I'm in a position right now where everything I've built is coming together. And, views and subs are way up on the channel because of the cross promo I've done this summer, and we're killing it, and the money's really, really good, and I'm physically fit for the first time in my life, and even though my marriage didn't work, I'm single, and I'm meeting people, and I'm having fun. If you did not listen to that H3 podcast, I do go into that into graphic detail as I have on stream. Don't know that I'll ever go into the details here on YouTube, but it's just been this amazing experience where every door I've ever wanted open is open. If I want to talk to a game developer, they're ready to talk to me. If I want to talk to another creator, they're ready to talk for me. And if I need money, there's money to be made, and I get to spend time with you every single day, entertaining you on stream and entertaining you on YouTube and entertaining you by showing you my life and helping educate and help other people and help other creators. And I have to get mentally healthy to do it. I really do, because I've been so self-destructive since I've gone home, and I've only been home for 24 hours. Managed to do a little bit of damage during that period of time, and no big pieces of damage. But here's what I will say. No permanent damage. That's the rule. If you are in crisis, when you're having issues, whether you're on a drunken tirade, if you've gotten really stupidly high, or you're feeling self-destructive, no permanent damage. Anything else can be fixed. That's my goal. So I'm going to continue to decompress. I'm going to continue to relax and play some games. I'm going to continue to stream this week. I'm going to continue to nurse my health and my legs, and I'm going to continue to do my therapy exercises, get ready to go back to physical therapy here in a week, get ready for the 4th of July party, get ready for my birthday at the end of the month. I'm gearing up to do some really great stuff. But I still have to tackle the very last project I have left to tackle. And I'm so glad there's so many of you there to help. I'll work on this stupid thing. Guys, thanks for watching. I love you very much. I'll speak with you again soon.
Welcome back to another Hardware News recap. For this week, we're kind of recapping again the NVIDIA NDA discussion that we posted previously on the channel. I'm joined by senior AMD correspondent Snowflake, who I don't know if she has anything to add this episode, but we'll also be talking about Micron ramping their GDDR6 production, the GTX 1050 3GB card that has arrived officially, by the way, and TSMC ramping 7nm production. Before that, this video is brought to you by our limited edition foil anniversary shirt. This shirt commemorates our 10-year anniversary design and is available in foil on a high-quality cotton shirt completely custom designed for GN. We're making a limited amount of these and then we'll never make them again, so get your pre-order in now to ensure you get yours. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab the GN Foil Teardown Anniversary shirt now. Okay. Okay, she's not a fan of the NVIDIA news items. We're killing the NVIDIA NDA discussion and the GTX 1050 discussion. You done? Thank you. So, first one is GN at LTX. We're going to be, or I'm going to be specifically at Linus's Expo on July 14th, I think it is. So, at LTX, I think they're doing a lot of stuff like case tosses. I think they're doing delidding, instructional guidance and stuff like that. I've offered to assist with some kind of booth or event or something like that. So anyway, I'll be there. If you show up, come say hi. If you bring a mod mat or something like that, I'd be happy to sign it. So first real news item, NVIDIA's NDA discussion. This is just, okay, really? You're going to destroy my paper and then leave? This is just further clarifying on some comments. We did that video where I brought on a lawyer and talked about the NVIDIA NDA that got kind of big news out of almost really seemingly nowhere. So one more point on that. A lot of things I saw, the comments I saw in that video, some of them were about, well, but this NDA will prevent GPP2 from getting out in the future if there's a GPP2. That specific sentiment, which seemed pretty common on Reddit and elsewhere, is very incorrect, because the thing is, an NDA doesn't just it's not like it just stops information. NVIDIA would have to give us the information confidentially and then say this is under NDA. So a couple of things here about GPP. GPP, the original and as far as we know the only version, it wasn't briefed to the press and so would not be covered under confidential information. It was not information provided by NVIDIA. It was found through third parties, specifically by HardOCP, and later we and others talked to other third parties about it. So none of that would be considered confidential information, which is defined in the NDA document. It's in the first sentence. So if you have concerns about what is confidential information, read the first sentence and then read what applies. The whole thing is one page, and then there's a second page of signatures. So I would encourage you to actually read the document if you're concerned about something like that. The other thing is, if there were something truly evil, like a GPP2, NVIDIA wouldn't brief us on it anyway, so even confidentially. So if you're worried about something super evil not getting out because the press are under NDA, that's kind of a false premise. More likely, it wouldn't get out because the press wouldn't be told, and maybe eventually a third party tells us, or someone figures out something evil is going on, whatever. That's not covered under confidential information. Separately, and I said this in the video, but I want to reiterate it here, information has a way of getting out. So if there's something really bad going on, I'm sure that it will find a way out somehow. So I wouldn't be worried about that either. Also, if there was something legitimately illegal going on, there are protections for exposing those types of practices. So all of this is just to say the comments about, well, this NDA is going to prevent a GPP2 from happening. No, because GPP was not confidential information. It would not be covered under an NDA. It was from a third party. Hopefully I've made that clear now. So that specific concern is invalid. But anyway, it just honestly seems like a lot of people didn't read the document. They just read the comments in comment sections on Reddit and then parroted them. So seriously, if you have not read it, it's a very simple NDA. It is one page. I think it's like 5 or 6 actual paragraphs. It takes a few minutes. It's not that complicated. It's not shrouded in legalese or anything like that. It's very plain language. If you've ever seen an NDA before, it shouldn't be that shocking. So I would encourage you to read it if you have concerns. Next news item. Also, you can watch our discussion with the lawyer if you're curious about his take on it. Micron is ramping GDDR6 production. So this is pretty big news. Micron has announced that they are commencing production of their GDDR6 memory following their G5X memory. They're the only vendor who made G5X. And that means that Micron becomes the last of the big three to announce their mass production for GDDR6. Hynix has been in mass production for a little bit now, Samsung as well. Micron will initially be rolling out a few different 8 gigabit chips for graphics, for self-driving or automotive applications, and for networking. And Micron also has plans in the future for faster 16 gigabit per second chips. For reference, GDDR5 runs at between 6 and 8 gigabits per second, 8 on the high end, 7 on the sort of GTX 1050 class cards. And also for reference, GDDR5X or G5X runs between 10 and 11 gigabits per second on average, mostly on the high-end NVIDIA, well, entirely on the high-end NVIDIA cards. And Micron also noted that its first round of chips will be 10, 12, 14 gigabit per second modules at 8 gigabits for the individual units. And GDDR6 will supersede the decade-old now GDDR5 memory format for graphics, and also the more recent G5X. It's going to be better than that. The new memory will offer a density improvement up to 32 gigabytes capacity. The memory also should have a lower operating voltage between 1.25 and 1.35 volts, which is a reduction from the G5 and G5X voltage of 1.5 to 1.6, sometimes a bit lower depending on the application. GDDR6 also stands to offer improvements in data rate overall, and Micron has successfully overclocked one of its GDDR6 chips, prototypes, to 20 gigabits per second, showing some range. Not really, probably not stable, or they'd ship it at that, but it's possible to overclock them pretty high. So big improvement over GDDR5. We've previously discussed pricing of GDDR6, and we spoke with supplier sources close to SK Hynix, who told us at the time that we should expect approximately a 20% increase in BOM or bill of materials price over GDDR5, with plans to lower that to closer to 10% later. So if a module costs $8 typically for one, add 20%, and that's GDDR6. Next news item, GTX 1050 3GB cards have arrived if you needed more graphics cards. So the new graphics card that's entered the channel is still on Pascal. It's nothing new. It's the GTX 1050 3GB, which increases CUDA core count from 640 on the original 1050 to 768, which is actually exactly what the 1050 Ti uses for core count. CUDA cores, if you were to call them that. We have a video on whether that's correct nomenclature elsewhere. And that puts it closer to a 1050 Ti in specs. It also, the boost clock is increased now to 1518 megahertz recommended from NVIDIA, up from 1455 on the original 1050 and significantly higher than the 1050 Ti's base and boost, although manufacturers can change those. Memory speed remains 7 gigabits per second, so the only major downside or downgrade to the 1050 3GB is a drop to a 96-bit memory interface bus width from 128, and that brings down the memory bandwidth to 84 gigabytes per second from 112 on both the 1050 and the 1050 Ti. And there's also obviously 1 extra gigabyte of memory on there, up from 2 on the original 1050. The 3 gigabyte cards are expected to ship around $160, which is around the original 1050 Ti aftermarket card price, which we actually did not recommend 1050 Ti's at that price originally, but the market has changed substantially since then. Cards aren't as affordable as they should be. The EVGA SC model will be around $170. And again, considering video card prices for the last few months, it's really difficult to gauge value these days. Prices change every day. If everything were MSRP, that wouldn't be a good deal, but that's not really always the case right now. So I guess look around at other cards. The 570 would be a significant improvement over the 1050 or Ti, but it's hard to find one. So alternatively, a low-end 1060 would be a decent choice as well. TSMC is next in the news. TSMC has begun producing 7nm products commercially and hopes to make 5nm in 2019 or 2020. The company's technology symposium in Taiwan directly refuted claims that 7nm yield was poor, leading to higher prices and lower volume as speculated. Instead, TSMC stated that it's actually emboldening its wafer output by 9% for 7nm. The company is working on 50 taped-out designs by end of year 2018, including major design focus on GPU, AI, and cryptocurrency ASICs. Apple's upcoming A12 processor will also impact TSMC's 7nm focus. The foundry already has a waitlist of 20 customers for 7 nanometer, including AMD, NVIDIA, Bitmain, and Qualcomm. Next up, NVIDIA and IBM, in collaboration with numerous other partners, have helped the US usurp China as owner of the world's fastest supercomputer. The machine, dubbed Summit, has helped propel the US back to the forefront of supercomputing and bested China's Sunway Taihu Light machine. Summit belongs to the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Laboratory and consumes 5,600 square feet of space. Summit scored 122.3 petaflops of compute performance on HPL, the benchmark that Top 500 uses to score supercomputers. Summit consists of 4356 nodes, or compute servers, interconnected, each equipped with a pair of 22-core IBM Power 9 CPUs, 6 NVIDIA Tesla V100 GPUs, and it consumes 15 megawatts of power, where 1 megawatt equals 1,000 kilowatts. So 15 megawatts would put you at 15 million watts. Sierra is another IBM-built machine and represents the US and claimed the number 3 slot. Sierra's design is similar to that of Summit's. Overall, the US claims 124 of the top 500 supercomputers, coming in behind China with 206 total systems. Summit was conceived to research the fields of human disease, astrophysics, fusion energy, and climate change. NVIDIA notes that Summit is capable of 3 exaops of deep learning operations. Overall, not a bad way to spend $200 million. This next one's kind of interesting. Corsair has acquired Elgato, the streaming capture card company. Corsair recently got windfall from a venture capital firm, and as such, it seems like they've expanded their budget quite a bit. So rather than make their own streaming device and compete, they just decided to acquire Elgato, and they are now widening their focus to include game streamers. Now, as with most acquisitions, Corsair promises that Elgato will continue to operate largely independently without much influence or oversight from Corsair, although that never really turns out to be the case. As long as it's overall positive, though, having more money is probably a good thing for the folks at Elgato. Corsair didn't disclose many details regarding the purchase, such as the price or any potential staffing changes, but they are looking to expand Elgato's reach in terms of products for streaming. NAND prices should continue to decline into second half of 2018 for the next news item. This is a report from DRAM Exchange and TrendForce, which suggests that the contract prices of NAND used on SSDs will continue to decline for the second half of the year amidst improved yield rates of current-gen NAND, coupled with NAND market research, or reaching rather, a balance between supply and demand. NAND prices have been descending for 2 consecutive quarters now, opposite of the RAM prices almost, and suppliers are expected to postpone capacity expansion plans in an attempt to moderate the price decline. Demand is expected to remain weak due to slow growth in notebooks, a lack of specification upgrades in smartphones, and less replacement demand overall. However, a looming iPhone release this fall could influence the NAND market heavily. Next up, Gigabyte reiterated the GPU shipment decline coming up. So in last week's hardware news, we mentioned reports that suggested a steep GPU decline in shipments overall due to mining demand shrinkage, and we had previous reports from JPR on the same subject. This week, Gigabyte basically confirmed that the GPU market is preparing for steep declines ahead for the second half of 2018 with Pascal primarily. Gigabyte expects their GPU shipments to fall 20% in second half, with ASP, or average selling price, to drop by about 10%. Gigabyte and likely other AIB partners will be shifting focus back to the gaming market, which should be a good thing for prices, and some of that is reflected already. So speaking of that, hardware sales for the week, GPU prices have actually been returning somewhat to MSRP. We'll link a couple of the better deals below in the description if you want one. Threadripper is more permanently dropped now. The 1950X is at $750. Original price was $1,000. It's a good deal. Just note that Threadripper 2 is coming out in August, and there's a reason they're dropping the price so much. We haven't tested Threadripper 2 yet. I don't have it, but given the improvements in Ryzen 2 or Ryzen Plus, if you prefer, over the Threadripper or over the original launch, we could expect that similar improvements would be made for Threadripper 2. So either way, though, $750 is not a bad deal if you really need one and need it cheaper. Asus's Zenith Extreme is also down to $500 following this, and we'll link all of those in the description below. So as always, thank you for watching. If you want to pick up our limited edition shirt that I'm wearing right now, we have it on pre-order on store.gamersnexus.net. You can grab one there once they're all sold out. That's it. We're not making any more. And go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.
4, 3, 2, and boom. That's a nice hat. I've told you already, but live, I got to tell you, that is a nice. It's very kind of Indiana Jones, but
it's not quite that, and not
it's a
quite
little-
cowboy. Yeah,
But it's yeah, you're like in the middle of that.
yeah.
You're
it's-
riding a
it's-
wave. You're dancing on the edge.
Well, I have a really fat head, and so there's this website called like bigheads.com.
There's a website
Yeah, it's
for it?
a total website for
I gotta
fat-headed
get my friend
people.
Bert Kreischer a hat then. I put his hat on. I couldn't believe how big his head was. It's like there was like an inch gap all around my head. I thought I had a big head.
Yeah, so if you know your head size, do you know your head size?
No, I do not.
So it turns out if you know your head size, that number comes from somewhere. Can I tell you what it is?
Sure.
So if you measure the circumference of your head, just get a tape measure, like you're measuring your waistline, but do it around your head, and take that number, divide it by pi, then that's your hat size.
Whoa.
Yeah. Just
Seems complicated.
divide by 2.
Why can't it be just like your waist, 32? You know, your waist is what your waist
I know.
is.
It just is what it is, right? Just why can't it just be the circumference, right?
Seems complicated.
Divide by 2. So it turns out if you know your head size, that number comes from somewhere. Can I tell you what it is?
Sure.
So if you measure the circumference of your head, just get a tape measure, like you're measuring your waistline, but do it around your head, and take that number, divide it by pi, then that's your hat size.
Whoa.
Yeah. Just
Seems complicated.
divide by 2.
Why can't it be just like your waist, 32? You know, your waist is what your waist
I know.
is.
It just is what it is, right? Just why can't it just be the circumference, right? So what it turns out to be, so what that means is, if you're dividing by pi, you're getting the diameter of the circle that has the same dimension as the circumference of your head. So if you have an oblong head, then what it's doing
Problematic.
is finding out what the circle is, the diameter of the circle that has that same circumference as your head.
Oh,
Okay. That's what that's doing. Whether that helps the hat maker.
So immediately I start thinking about Dan Aykroyd on Saturday Night Live as a conehead.
Oh,
right? Remember?
Well, then you need a tall hat for that too.
There's an issue there. There's
Yeah.
an issue there.
So, dude, you're still doing stand up. That's great.
Constantly.
I'm loving it.
Yeah.
And I
Thank
caught you a few months ago. You were emceeing some MMA. Was it? What was?
Well, I'm always doing that. Yeah.
Oh, you're always
UFC,
doing that. Okay, I
yeah.
only catch some of it then.
Well, I'm
I
the
think it's great you
color-
stayed in shape because
Yes.
I'm a fat slob right
Well,
now.
you were ripped back in the day,
Back in the
man.
day.
I saw a
You
picture of
saw
you
the
when you were
picture.
wrestling. And I was like, damn, Neil, you
no,
look good.
I had some street cred back then.
Do you exercise at all now?
No, it's not that I don't have the energy to. It's trying to find the time.
There's you back in the day. Look at you, shredded.
Ooh.
How much did you
Ooh.
weigh back then?
Oh,
Let me guess.
go on.
176.
No. I'm 6'2", so I'm 190 pounds in that.
Oh,
exactly
you look
100.
great.
I have big thighs and stuff. Other wrestlers would have skinnier thighs and things. So I was also taller than anyone I wrestled. So since we're the same height, it meant they had bigger muscles actually. So because we're the same weight, right? But no, did I say that right? I'm taller,
Right.
But we're the same weight. So that means they have bigger muscles.
Right.
Because none of us have fat, right? So I had to do things that my lankiness would enable me to do and to accomplish that they couldn't. So I have long reach, you know,
Right.
this sort of, I scoop an ankle, that kind of thing.
There's great advantages to having long limbs in martial arts, particularly in wrestling, grappling, because of leverage.
Yeah, also if you're quick and with long limbs,
Yeah.
and I was both. But if they got me in their grip, it was hard for me to get out.
So, what kind of exercise do you do these days?
No, that's not, no.
Nothing? Nothing?
No, I'm trying. I'm trying. When I'm in, I'm good. But I've just got so much going on. And you have to
Yeah.
like make the time.
That's a problem, right? When you become a little bit too successful for your own
I
good.
saw some food. There's a lot of food documentaries, you know, trying to get you to eat differently. So I thought I'd watch them all. I binged on them one weekend while I was doing other stuff, and I
got hungry.
No, one of the guys, he was trying to lose 100 pounds or something. So every 15 pounds he lost, he put a bowling ball up on the counter and said, "That is what I'm not carrying around with me."
Whoa!
Because the bowling ball is about 15 pounds. And I said, "Wow, he's measuring a weight in bowling balls. That's something." Because we say, "Oh, I'm 3 pounds less and 2 pounds." That doesn't hit you emotionally the way a bowling ball does.
Yeah.
After you've lost 15 pounds, because no one wants to be carrying that around. So psychologically, I thought that was quite potent.
That is potent. I think we do need some. I usually use like plates. I think of weight plates or dumbbells.
Oh, okay, yeah, that works too.
In that regard.
Yeah.
I started doing intermittent fasting pretty recently, where I only allow myself to eat 10 hours in a day.
Oh, wow.
That's
10 hours out of the 24-hour day.
Yes. So 14.
I had Terry Crews on my radio show on Star Talk. My boy's ripped. Okay.
Yeah, he looks great.
He's still, and he's like 47 or something. I mean, so he doesn't eat until 12 noon.
Oh,
and then
same sort of
he doesn't
deal.
eat till after 10 o'clock. That's right.
Yeah, 10 hours.
And then he doesn't eat after 10, right?
Yeah.
So it's a 10-hour thing. And so he's watching everyone else have brunch and breakfast, and so he's got to overcome that. But so it's a little bit of fasting each day.
Intermittent fasting.
Just to keep the discipline. I think it's, at the end of the day, it's really just discipline.
Well, it's not just that. It also forces your body to burn fat instead of carbohydrates. And when it forces your body to burn fat, that state of ketosis is actually easier to maintain because you don't get hungry.
Yeah, then there's no roller coaster.
The crash, the carbohydrate crash that you get.
Right.
Is that outside of the realm of possibility for you?
No, I can totally... I'm a ketosis guy.
Anything involving science? Come on. I mean, it's in there, baby. It's in there.
I once got raked over the coals, not by everyone, but I tweeted once. I said, if there was a diet book written by a physicist, it would contain one sentence. Consume calories at a lesser rate than, at a greater rate, consume calories at a lesser rate than you burn them.
That is sort of true.
That's the one sentence diet book. No, it's more complicated than that. And everybody just try to get it's this, it's that, and that. And one of the great things of physics, when you do physics, is all the details are just cut off it's window dressing, and you get down to the window itself. And that's what the analysis works on.
I have rarely seen you attacked, but I did see you attacked when you were celebrating Sir Isaac Newton's birthday.
Oh!
I was like, people were so mad.
People lost their minds.
They lost their mind when you were, by the way, incorrect in the date of Jesus' birthday. That is not the date of Jesus' birthday.
Yeah, Jesus was not born on the 25th. Right?
No, I mean, it's just...
Right, plus, I didn't even mention it. So